Hello, and thank you for taking the time to watch this video guidance for the new Creative Foundations Fund. I'm Owen Pettinger, Senior Manager in the Capital team. This is the second of two briefings about the Creative Foundations Fund. The first was an introduction to the fund and a guide on how to complete the expression of interest. This briefing will focus on what is required to create a strong application, and you can find more details on what is required for the full application process on our website. We will release another briefing once we have agreed the successful applicants to discuss next steps if your application is successful. This video guidance includes British Sign Language, BSL interpretation, and automated captions which are visible on the screen. You will find the PowerPoint slides and audio transcript on the same web page as this recording. This is what we'll be covering today. So we'll start with a brief reminder of the key outcomes and elements of the Creative Foundations Fund. We'll remind you of the aims and outcomes specifically. We will be explaining who can apply, including partnerships. We're going to talk about what makes a strong Creative Foundations Fund application, including details such as project need, timetables, partnership funding, and risk assessment. There'll also be specific detail about what will be needed in applications for building projects. And then the next part of the session will be explaining how we make our decisions and what happens if you're awarded funding, including some important details about security requirements. And finally, we'll have a reminder of where you can get advice and support with your application. The Creative Foundations Fund is an open access capital fund that supports creative and cultural organisations in England. The fund aims to revitalise, restore, retrofit or renew cultural assets, including addressing urgent problems with buildings and/or equipment that have prevented work being delivered to the public. Some key points are that the fund can only support expenditure that will be capitalised on your balance sheet. Applicants must be not-for-profit cultural organisations based in England. The fund covers grants from £100,000 to £10 million across two strands, which we will discuss as required across this briefing, and the funding will be awarded for projects running from the 1st of April 2026 to the 31st of March 2029 for both strands. The Creative Foundations Fund is a competitive fund with very high demand. While we will share some key information with you in this video today, it is important that you read both the guidance for applicants and the how to apply guide for the relevant strand before applying, which are available on our website. The aims of this fund are to increase the economic sustainability of culture and creative organisations through improving existing cultural buildings and equipment, to decrease the risk and financial impact of abandoned or cancelled performances, exhibitions, or events caused by equipment or infrastructure failure, and to grow audience engagement and access by underserved communities to create high quality creative work and cultural infrastructure. The outcomes we expect to see from this investment are improved value for money through decreasing the amount of expenditure on maintenance and repair of cultural assets, reduced loss of high quality cultural work from creative and cultural organisations as a result of asset failure or degradation. Cultural organisations should develop more sustainable financial and business models, adapting to the changing environment and needs of the communities with whom they work, and improved energy efficiency and environmental performance of cultural buildings and equipment. All applicants will be asked to use our 4 investment principles to shape their activity to achieve the aims of the Arts Council's strategy, Let's Create. As a reminder, our investment principles are ambition and quality, dynamism, environmental responsibility, and inclusivity and relevance. And you can find further information about these on our website in the strategy pages. Who can apply? The fund is open to applications for not-for-profit cultural organisations based in England that can demonstrate that their primary aims are cultural, the activities they are applying for fall within our remit, that they have presented or delivered cultural activity in the last 12 months. Unfortunately, museums and libraries are not eligible as they are served by separate forms to support this, MEND and LIF. Certain partnerships are eligible, and we'll give you some more details on the following slide. It is important to note that being invited to apply does not necessarily indicate full eligibility, and that applicants need to meet the eligibility requirements detailed in the guidance at the point of application. The expression of interest process that has taken place to reach this point is not a grant decision-making process, and final funding decisions will be based on the details in a full application that has gone through the assessment, balancing, and review processes as outlined in these slides and in the published guidance for applicants. So a little bit on partnership applications. In partnership applications, one organisation takes the lead of submitting the application and, if they're successful, will take on responsibility for administering the grant and fulfilling the funding agreement terms. All partners must meet the applicant organisation eligibility criteria, i.e. they must be based in England, operating on a not-for-profit basis and delivering cultural activities. If you employ a commercial operator for your assets, i.e. one operating for profit, so typically a company limited by shares, they cannot be a partner to the application. For example, a local authority owned theatre run by a commercial operator would not be eligible. Partnership agreements are also important. Partnerships must be governed by a formal agreement setting out what each partner is responsible for and how the partnership will be managed. The partnership agreement is a mandatory attachment for partnership bids and will be subject to ACE review and requirements. There is quite a lot to say about what makes a strong application, so we'll walk through a few headlines here and then we'll discuss each one in turn on the subsequent slides. Number one, projects where need is well evidenced, i.e. business critical and urgent. We will talk about this in more detail later on in the video. Projects ready to start on or after the 1st of April 2026 and to complete no later than the 31st of March 2029. Projects where partnership funding is confirmed or will be confirmed by the initial payment request. Projects where detailed risk assessment has been undertaken and appropriate mitigation strategies identified and costed. An impactful project which will benefit the widest possible groups of audiences and users. These three are additional pointers for anybody wanting to make a strong application for building projects and do not apply to equipment purchases. Projects must be at REBA work stage 3 or equivalent at the point of application, demonstrating the best possible cost and scope certainty, professionally ascertained and documented. Planning permission or granting of other statutory permissions must be imminent, i.e. achievable by the projected start on-site date. Projects must demonstrate appropriate ownership of land and/or buildings, freehold or leasehold, which we'll come to later, and that has to be in place at the point of application. Work must be business critical and urgent, and if your building project application does not meet our criteria, it will be ineligible, and we will look more closely at these building project requirements later on in the video. Now we'll just have a run through of each one of these 8 pointers individually. So working through each of the headlines in turn now, this slide relates to details on lost activity as part of your application. Here you can give evidence of the impact of asset failure and degradation and/or the need for urgent capital works. Evidencing impact of asset failure and degradation and/or the need for urgent capital works is done by the submission of the following. So it's annual figures for 1 year for Strand 1 and 2 years for Strand 2 for the number of hours of activity, that is performances, exhibitions or events cancelled or abandoned, the number of seats that have been unusable or impacted, and the area in square meters of unusable space. If you are offered a grant, as part of evaluating the project, you will be asked to update us on these figures for the years during and following your project. We will also ask you to evidence the financial impacts due to asset failure and degradation. Here we will ask you for annual figures, again, 1 year for strand 1 and 2 years for strand 2, for lost revenue or income from performances, exhibitions and or events cancelled or abandoned, the cost of reactive and emergency repairs, i.e. not routine maintenance, the cost of hiring emergency or replacement equipment, cost of hiring or renting alternative space, and additional staffing costs due to reactive measures. Again, successful applicants will be asked to update us on these statistics, as well as those related to the loss of activity every year to help evaluate impact of the funding in the years during and following your project being implemented. Next, a little detail on the timetable for your projects. The start date is defined as a date you will commit to start the activities to deliver the project as set out in your grant agreement. This is likely to be either the date your board or equivalent confirms its commitment, financial or otherwise, for the project to proceed, and or the date on which you accept our grant agreement and commit to delivery of the project set out in your application. This has to be within 30 days of the grant agreement being issued. Due to the nature and aims of this programme, we expect works to be urgently needed and for this project start date to be scheduled as soon as possible after the 1st of April 2026. It's important to note that our defined project start date is not the same as a start on site date, for example, for construction works on a building project, which is likely to happen a little bit later in the project. We will schedule your first payment 3 months after your start date, and you cannot request your first payment until you can demonstrate that you have met all of the first payment conditions. Now we move on to partnership funding. It could weaken your application if your fundraising timetable has the potential to delay your project getting underway and therefore meeting the initial payment conditions. We expect grant holders to have secured 100% of their matched funding by their first payment request. Otherwise, the initial payment will be withheld. When considering the scale and scope of the project to apply for, the partnership or match funding available to you, and when it is either secured or expected, should be a key consideration. If you have minimal funds already secured and or do not have a strong track record of fundraising, you should tailor the scope of your project accordingly, including only the most urgent work packages. We encourage you to prioritise the works you are applying for and only apply for the overall package of works that has a strong chance of being fully funded within the timetable. The risk register you submit with your application will help us to assess the governance and management of your activity. Covering all the risks you have identified with your project, it should include risks to the successful delivery of your project, as well as the risks to your organisation during project delivery, the risks themselves detailed and the likelihood of the risk occurring, the impact on your project if it does happen, how much each risk may cost. This will help you check whether you have adequate contingency allowances to cover the identified risks, how you can prevent or mitigate the risk if it does happen, and the person responsible for dealing with the risk. The strongest applications will demonstrate the greatest possible impact on the widest possible audience. You should indicate how your project will meet the diverse needs of your community and how you have taken into account users and stakeholders' input in the project design and delivery, and how your project contributes strongly to each of our four investment principles, which are ambition and quality, dynamism, environmental responsibility, and inclusivity and relevance. You can find more information about our strategy, Let's Create, and the four investment principles on our website. These next few slides relate to buildings projects only. The REBA Plan of Work 2020 is a procedural guide for architects and construction professionals working on building projects. You can find a detailed breakdown on the REBA website. It is an eligibility requirement that building projects have completed REBA Work Stage 3, if you're following the REBA Work stages, by the full application submission. If you are not following the REBA work stages, your full application should include a written specification and/or drawings and associated cost estimates in sufficient detail to meet the requirements within the guidance. Drawings and/or specifications are critical to making a strong application for a building project, and the following applies even if you're not following the REBA plan of work. Relevant drawings and/or specifications accompanied by a cost plan or detailed expenditure document prepared by a suitably qualified professional must be included as mandatory attachments to the full application. These should describe in detail the scope of works in an organisation's full application, including how the project will meet legal requirements, statutory approvals or quality standards, such as, but not limited to, materials, performance criteria or workmanship standards relevant to the project. They should show an applicant has sought professional advice relevant to the scope of the works in their full application, including whether their project should follow the REBA Plan of Work 2020. They should demonstrate they are ready to commence detailed specification and contractor or supplier procurement work if the funding is confirmed, and they should show that the project scope is fully established, including demonstrating coordinated proposals for architectural, structural, and building services designs. If relevant, specify key materials and products as well. Projects where drawings and specifications do not meet these standards will be deemed ineligible and will not proceed to assessment. Just a quick note here on statutory approvals, with some examples listed above, such as planning permission and listed buildings consent. So due to the urgent nature of building project applications to this fund, we assume that statutory approvals will be in place imminently to allow the project to start as soon as possible after the 1st of April 2026. Obviously, all approvals must be in place before the start of any material work to the building. Again, focused on building projects, the lead applicant must demonstrate ownership of the land and/or buildings, either freehold or leasehold, and that the land and/or buildings can be used for the project purposes. These requirements are there to protect public funds by ensuring that funded buildings and assets will be used for the grant purposes and will deliver public benefit for a set period of time, 10 to 30 years, determined by the size of the grant. We'll now have a look in a bit more detail at leasehold requirements. This slide breaks down the requirements for ownership against the size of the grant being applied for. The lease must be for at least the following terms based on award size, calculated from the date they accept the grant agreement. For grants up to and including £500,000, it's 10 years. Above £500,000 and up to and including £1 million is 15 years. Above £1 million and £1 and up to and including £5 million is 20 years. And finally, above 5 million and up to including £10 million is 30 years. A compliant lease is one which is registered with the land registry, is assignable, is without break clause for the duration of the grant agreement, is without a forfeiture on an insolvency clause for the duration of the grant agreement, has a permitted user clause that is compliant with project and the proposed use. These requirements must be met as a condition of the first payment. We have a tip here. If you are offered funding and your lease is not compliant, a formal variation must be made using a variation agreement. Before applying, please make sure your landlord will agree to such a variation. This is a legal process which can be time consuming and you will incur legal fees. So this is a bit more now on how we make our decisions. Arts Council England will make decisions using the 3 criteria of the meeting the brief, governance and management, and financial viability, and based on the information you provide in the full application and attachments, any further information that we request, and where relevant, publicly available data and information from the Charity Commission and Companies House websites relating to your constitution and audited accounts from the past 2 years. If you are a national portfolio organisation, investment principles supported organisation, music hub lead organisation, or creative people and places lead organisation, we will also consider the information we already hold about your organisation. The assessment ratings fall into met, strong, met, and not met. Based on these ratings, we will recommend whether an application is suitable for funding. Applications that do not achieve at least met under all three criteria will not be recommended for funding. And you can find detailed information about our assessment criteria and associated prompts in the How to Apply guidance. We expect to receive more fundable applications than we have budget to support. So balancing is a term we use to describe how we arrive at the final set of recommendations for a balanced portfolio of projects. In this case, the balancing criteria are geographical location, type of activity and organisation, diversity, and risk. Balancing against these three criteria helps us to achieve a range of project types when we're awarding funding. So in terms of post-award steps, more details will follow once we've made decisions on who's been successful. But the headline next steps are that the grant agreement will be issued. Now, this is a legally binding contract, and it is important to read it carefully and obtain board approval before signing the agreement. Security will have to be arranged for building projects. Applicants will instruct solicitors and send us their details, and this must be in place by initial payment for Strand 2 and by second payment for Strand 1. Quarterly payment requests and progress reports will be required at various intervals: first, second, interim, and final. Annual data collection will be submitted by you to ensure that we can evaluate impact. And once complete, an evaluations form will be required 12 months post completion, and a final evaluation report with Strand 2 projects required to appoint an independent evaluator. So a little bit now on building projects and security. We'd like to explain what we mean by security requirements. This refers to the legal commitment that's required under the terms of the grant. Typically, security will involve either a deed of covenant or a legal charge with a restriction on title and supporting legal documents. To define those terms, the legal charge is similar to a mortgage. The second term is the deed of covenant, and this is the legal commitment that the grantee makes to us that commits to the asset being used in a specific way. In short, you will need to ask for the Arts Council's permission to make any changes to your project asset, and this covers the term of the grant agreement, which may be up to 30 years. Our tip here is to be sure your board is aware of the implications of giving Arts Council England a legal charge. You can share our guidance on security with them and with your legal and/or property advisors. If you are offered funding, you must let us have solicitor details as soon as possible. It typically takes 12 weeks or more to put security in place, so this process must be started when you accept the grant offer. This is a brief note on payments to assist applicants with their timeline planning. The initial payment will be scheduled 3 months after a grant agreement start date. By this date, the grant holders must accept our grant agreement and send us their bank details, provide written evidence of 100% confirmed partnership funding, provide evidence of having met any payment conditions set out in the grant agreement, submit a procurement method statement for their project where one was not provided as part of the application. Payment requests and progress reports will be scheduled quarterly thereafter. Finally, here is a reminder of where you can find further information and support. The links on screen can be found in this slide deck, which we've published on our website. Visit the Creative Foundations Fund webpage to read the applicant guidance and the relevant How to Apply Strand guide in full, as well as the large print version and audio version as required. We will also have a frequently asked questions section, which we will update regularly, and we encourage you to read our strategy, Let's Create, and details of the investment principles on our website. Our website also has some useful capital resources to help you prepare and manage your project, including case studies and best practice guides. If you have any questions or if you require access support with your application, you can contact the customer services team via phone or web chat, or you can email enquiries@artscouncil.org.uk. Thanks very much for listening, and we really look forward to hearing from you.